Hello again, macroeconomics students. This is just a short video to familiarize you with the concept of the business cycle from Chapter 6 of the Krugman textbook. So as you'll have seen by now, the business cycle is just a fancy name to refer to the fact that over time the economy tends to grow with some periods of shrinking. So you've got growth alternating with shrinking. Now, when we say the economy is growing or shrinking, what do we mean? Basically, it means growth or decrease in the amount of production, the volume of production of goods and services like food and clothes and cars and TV shows and dental services. All of those things are goods and services that we consume. So when the economy grows, what we're saying is we're able to produce more of these things that we need, and if the economy shrinks, we're producing less of those things over time. All right? Now, primarily, market economies have a tendency to grow more than they shrink. So in the long run, you tend to see over time growth in the amount of economic production that's happening. And we'll talk about that quite a bit in Chapter 9 in the second half of the course. We'll return to that. And the main way that we measure the amount of production of goods and services is something called GDP, Gross Domestic Product, which you'll learn about next week. That's right around the corner. But for now, I just want to give you a little bit of discussion about the business cycle, especially how we represent it graphically. So in Chapter 6 of the Krugman textbook, you'll see a version of this graph, and it looks sort of like this. Right? On the vertical here, we've got the volume of production of goods and services, and also the amount of employment. Typically, those two things track each other. Just lately, they've started to become a little dissociated. We can have more production without more job growth. But historically, and typically, that's how it works. Okay, they tend to go together. And of course, horizontally, we've got the passage of time. So here's a sort of hypothetical, simplified, schematic representation of what GDP, the amount of production, does over time. And you can see we've got periods of growth in production alternating with periods of shrinking. Growth in production, shrinking, and more growth. That's the business cycle. It's fairly simple. So during the periods of shrinking, we're producing less goods and services as time goes on, not more. And of course, we usually see a decrease in employment there. And of course, the term for this shrinking portion of the business cycle is a recession. Right? That's what that is. So you've got periods of growth, or sometimes we'll call that expansion, growth or expansion, alternating with these recessionary periods of shrinkage in the economy and in the job market as well. The tendency for layoffs and for job losses to come from recessions, this is sort of a visual representation of that. And one thing just to add, you may have noticed this already in Chapter 6 or seen it elsewhere in other classes you've taken. Usually graphs like this, where we're looking at the change in economic production over time, if we go through a period of recession, these downward trend portions, usually those will be also indicated with a shaded sort of vertical bar. And actually, zoom in a little bit here, you can see that. Right? These periods where we've got recession, decreases in production here, these portions, usually you'll see that shaded in some way, or here I've just hatched it with a pen to give you a sense of it. Okay? But that's something that's really important. The business cycle is one of the dominant subjects in all of macroeconomics, so you'll definitely want to make sure you spend some time with Chapter 6 and take a look at what the basics of it are. And we'll definitely add some detail to it in Chapter 7. We'll look at how we use GDP to measure the amount of production and how we measure its rate of growth, which is very important. And also this week you've got an article in your Real World Reader that talks about how the business cycle's effect on jobs has sort of changed over time. And lately these days we definitely have the part of the cycle where jobs are lost in the recession, but the part where jobs come back and we've got growth in the job marketplace during the growth periods, that's sort of gotten a little bit weaker over the last few business cycles. So you'll see some material about that in your reader as well. Make sure you take a look at that before this week's quiz, and see you on the boards.